Years ago when I was 11 years old, I was staying home alone with my only little brother who was 7 at the time. It was around 9 p.m., dark, and pouring rain. We were both reading in our rooms, right next to the front door with a big window and open blinds. That's when I hear the front doorbell ring, followed by knocking. I thought my parents had arrived. Strange, though they didn't use the garage or their keys. I looked outside to check to see if their car was there, but nothing but rain. As I approached the door, I hear a man's voice, and it was definitely not my father's yell. "Would you like some cookies? We're selling Girl Scout cookies." I'm shocked at this, considering the weather and the time of day. Saying nothing, I check the peephole and peer through the side window, only to see it was not a father with his girl as I expected. My heart dropped. Standing there was a fully grown man, maybe in his late 50s. No box of cookies in sight, just soaking on our doorstep. I can remember the gut-wrenching feeling of having to check the locks while he was right on the other side. I know for sure he heard this. The 2 locks were the only thing separating myself and my brother from this potential monster. He continued to knock and mention the cookies, as I considered calling the cops. That's when I remembered the blinds were still open in my room where my brother was, and the lights were still on. As I turned the corner into the doorway, I see the man carefully peering into our window, eyeing my brother. He was still distracted by his book. My heart was pounding now as I began to panic. In a move that took all of my willpower, I quickly turned off the lights and ran over to drop the blinds in full view of the man. As fast as I could, I double-checked the locks in the house again, closed all the remaining blinds, and told my brother to go hang out in one of the closets in the interior of the house. I didn't tell him what was going on so he wouldn't be frightened, and for some reason, I never did call the cops or my parents. I just waited in the hallway until he left. Still thinking about it today gives me shivers. So many things could have gone wrong that night. My worst fear since is a stranger getting to the unlocked door before I do. I don't post too often, but I've read through a lot of these posts, and it sparked an encounter I had years ago while on a solo bike tour. It was the spring after I graduated college. I was a 22-year-old female and didn't know what to do with my life. So I decided to take a pause and ride my bike down the coast from Canada to Mexico. I was pretty nervous to be going by myself, but for the majority of the time, I felt pretty safe. Halfway through or so, got pretty comfortable sleeping alone in fairly empty campsites and parks. There were even some stretches on the road I rode with other bike tourists. This one encounter, however, brought my guard back up for the remainder of the trip. I was halfway down the Oregon coast. I was a mile or so out from the campground I'd planned to stay at for the night. There's this notable yellow vintage Ferrari or some kind of car that had passed me heading in the opposite direction. When I pulled into the campground, I stopped at the information board to look at the map and the fees. As I'm sitting there, I see the yellow car coming down the road and stops where I am. This older guy in his late 50s, early 60s gets out and starts looking at the board with me. He's friendly and seems completely normal. Charismatic even. He's asking me about my trip and starts mentioning how he's from the area, but's never checked out this campground. At this point, I'm still pretty naive. There are plenty of nice people I've met on this trip that chat me up and ask me about the bike tour. As he's talking to me, he's getting closer, and this is the part where I start to get uneasy. He would repeatedly reach out his hand to shake mine like he was about to leave, but every time he shook my hand, he would grab my forearm with his other hand and do this weird gasping laugh thing. I don't know. The way he did it looked insane, and the arm grasp was very firm. It sent shivers down my spine. Then he dives into another topic and repeats this freaky handshake maybe 2 or 3 more times in between. I realize that I'm completely out of sight from anyone in the campground. I have no phone service, and I'm now very close to him and his open car door. There's a knot in my stomach. I'm on the verge of tears, and my voice is shaking with every response. At the time, I didn't know why, but something felt very off about this man. I finally speak up loud, hoping someone else around me can hear me, and tell him I gotta get going, run to my bike and speed to the campground. Once I reach there, I don't even try to hike and bike the spots I'd planned. I just throw my tent down directly across from the camp host. Again, I had a lot of encounters with random strangers at this point, but not even one of them terrified me like this one did. I fought with the idea that he was probably just an overly friendly guy, but the fact that he would repeatedly grab my arm and laugh was frightening. All in all, most people I met were very sweet, and it made me very trusting of others. Even if he was harmless, his actions were a good reminder that I had to be mindful of my vulnerable situation and be very more alert.
This was very recent, 6 days ago to be exact. I am a huge fan of hiking or just simply taking walks in the woods. The only time I go alone is when I'm in the woods that I live near. This day, I was not. I was with my friend Lars on a walk about 3 hours from my house. We were planning on traveling around and staying at motels in the meantime. That day, we decided to take a walk in a popular area for people who like to take walks in the woods, like me. The catch was that this woods was freaking huge. Not really bad to us though. We were thrilled. There wasn't much. It was pretty. We escaped the crowd, but every now and then we would see someone walking by. We walked for a while until we got to this spot. Not too different from the rest. Except for one thing. Nobody else was around in this section. That's why me and Lars took this turn. The other turn had a lot of people. After a while of walking down this path, we spotted a man. A naked man. We gave each other the look and turned around. The man was slightly off path, bent over and looking at something. As me and Lars were walking back, talking about this strange man, I heard a voice behind me. I turned to see the man. He was talking to us about the bug he picked up. I got a good look at him. He was a bit tall, nothing crazy. Bald, with a few brown hairs beginning to grow. But completely naked. I flashed the man a smile and sped up. We got out of that place as fast as we could. Once we got to the car, we kind of laughed. Yes, it was creepy, but more weirdly funny. The car ride was nothing, so skip to the motel. As we're checking in at the motel, we see the man walk in. He was a bit hard to recognize considering the fact that he now had clothes on. Just torn up clothes. He waited behind us in line. Good thing we were almost done checking in, because as soon as we did, we went right to our room and locked it with no thought. Now it was definitely creepy. Was he following us, or was it a coincidence? We both decided we weren't going to stay at this hotel for more than a night. Heck, I didn't want to stay one night if it weren't for Lars telling me it was okay. That night, Lars wanted to go outside for a cigarette. I don't smoke, but no way I was going to stay in this room alone. I followed him outside and we chatted for a bit. After a few minutes, I see the guy walk out of the doors. Lars put out his cigarette and began to walk inside. But before we got in, the guy pulled out what was probably a knife or something else sharp. It was dark, I could barely see, and started carving through his sleeve and right at his arm. I saw liquid trickling to the ground and immediately knew it was blood. I rushed into the lobby, and Lars got the idea and followed. We alerted the staff, but by the time they got someone to come out, he was gone. To this day, I still have so many questions. Did he follow us? Why was he naked? Why was he doing that to himself? I will probably never know the answer, but honestly, I am still spooked. I don't know what I will do if I see him again, but I hope that I don't have to think about that.
Several years ago, I was in the midst of an awful divorce with my then husband, full of crazy allegations and typical angry filings centered around custody of our child. As with many divorces, friends and professional colleagues seem to pick one side or the other. In my case, there was one sort of professional contact who reached out to me after hearing about the divorce, who offered to be a witness for my case because of some experiences he related that I had been previously unaware of. regarding my ex's behavior out at networking events. So after this initial call, he started calling me on a semi-regular basis to make sure I was okay. This wasn't really someone I knew prior to the separation, and he was much older than I was, but claimed to have experience with divorce and custody, so I figured it was a good idea to be polite and not alienate him. My lawyer also told me that his testimony was important, so I kept things friendly, but I always had a weird feeling about him. A few months later, he called one day, and my son was very sick, and I told him I couldn't talk and explained why. He then offered to run to the store for me, which I honestly appreciated. But after that event, he kept dropping by uninvited, or he would stop by with cookies for my son. Again, I kept telling myself to keep things polite. The divorce is coming soon. Don't make this guy mad. During this time, he had also helped me set up a security cam system that my dad had mailed me. At one point, I needed someone to walk my dog, and he offered to do it. He used and returned a spare key the same day. One evening, he showed up while I was painting and insisted on sticking around to help, even though I was having my starting over catharsis and just wanted to do it alone. Not long after the painting day incident, he showed up unannounced and uninvited once again, having magazines with random decor saying, "We could finish decorating the house." And I was so weirded out that I made an excuse to leave. I then began ignoring his calls and took my son and dog to stay with my parents for several weeks to avoid these frequent drop-ins. I came home a few weeks later thinking he would have finally gotten the hint, and it was a nice and quiet day. The following morning I took my son on an outing, and we both came back hot and tired. I put him down for a nap in my bed and decided I would close my eyes with him. I woke up maybe an hour or so later, and it took me a moment to realize that something was way off. As I'm blinking off the sleep, I realized there was a rose bush sitting on my bedside table that I definitely had not put there. There's a post-it note on it, something about planting it in the yard. I started shaking immediately. I recognized the handwriting and stood up to go splash some water in my face and decide whether or not to call my parents or the police. As I stepped into my bathroom, I realized that the mirror was covered in post-it notes, all with super creepy messages that were intended to be like love notes or with affection. But ultimately, all they did was scare me. I was still waking up trying to figure out how these notes could have gotten here. My front door was definitely locked, but as I went from room to room, there were notes everywhere. I mean hundreds of post-it notes covering the walls, in my cabinets. There was even one inside my coffee maker. I started grabbing them and putting them all into a pile when I got to the one in the kitchen that made my blood run cold. It said, "You're cute when you think no one is watching you." I then realized that there was a security camera pointed right at where that note was left. The one I had set up months earlier when I didn't think he was a psychopath. Called my parents in hysterics, sent them a bunch of photos, and my dad insisted I should not call the police. But he would drive over and change the locks and put a chain on the door. So we immediately changed the password on all the security cameras, which I had installed to document if my ex tried to break into the house. There were 4 in total, 1 on the front porch and 3 inside the house, including 1 inside my bedroom. This man could apparently see and hear everything going on inside my house for months. I realized he had just paid attention to my passwords when I was setting up the system. But the only way I can figure out that he got into my house is that he must have made a copy of my house key the day he had walked my dog. And because my dog had now gotten to know him, he wouldn't have barked to warn me, which also scared me. I was absolutely horrified. This man had been in my house for a very long time now. There's no way he could have put that many notes up quickly. And he was right next to my face and feet from my son while we were sleeping. And somehow, he thought that was okay. I left and stayed with my parents again for a few days, afraid of what he was going to do when he realized that he was now both physically and digitally locked out of my house. When I came home that night, my son was at his dad's, and I was home alone. So I got on the phone with another friend from out of town. At about 10 p.m., he shows up at the door pounding on it, trying the lock, screaming obscenities, and demanding to be let in his house. Gone were all the niceties. This was someone completely furious and derailed. All I could do was hide in my bedroom until he left. This happened on St. Patrick's Day, so I'm sure he'd been drinking. After that, there were several other times someone would start knocking on the door in the middle of the night, always when my son wasn't home. He tried reaching out using fake social media accounts several times, always getting blocked. Years later, I discovered that he had friended my mom on Facebook, and therefore was still able to see all the photos of us that she posted or shared. There's a huge argument when I saw she had left her computer logged in. A conversation they were having about me and how he could get back into my life. I sold that house 2 years later, still finding notes even as I was packing, and I am more than relieved that he no longer knows where I live. I do not post photos of my new house online. I have changed the privacy settings on all of my social media accounts. I avoid all the places he used to go, the network events he attended. I stay under the radar as much as I possibly can. Could never bring myself to play back the security camera videos because I was traumatized enough and didn't want to see just how much danger we were really in. Hopefully he never sees this post, but you know who you are. And I hope to God our paths don't cross again. I'm in my 20s and I'm a female, and I'll start my story with a little background. I grew up as an only child. My parents had my sister when I was 11. Before she was born, my dad rebuilt our bungalow into a huge 2-story house. Hence, no one died in my new bedroom. Now, on to my experiences. The ages are round estimates. I'm mid-20s now. When I was 7, I started getting these nightmares about the concept of death. I would wake in the middle of the night crying for weeks on end, and then it would stop for a while before starting up once more. By the age of 10, this developed into a feeling of being watched and being unable to sleep and convinced that something, not someone, something, was watching me from a specific corner of my room, my new room, the one my dad built. Eventually, my dad ripped out that section of wall to show me that there was a space there. I don't exactly know why, but there was a space all the way around to the stairs. He tried to turn it into a fun den area for me, but I hated it and refused to ever go in there. This continued. When I was about 12, I got my first smartphone. The iPhone was my dad's old one, but it worked just fine. That was until it got dark outside and the phone would start typing random letters when I was texting someone or just typing. It only ever happened in that bedroom. As soon as I would exit the room, it would stop. I told my dad about it, and he said it must be damaged, and he bought me a new one for my 13th birthday. My dad believes in ghosts, but couldn't explain what was going on in that room he built. And my new phone, the one I just got, was doing the same thing now. I thought I was going mad. Not long after, I bought some candles from a witchcraft museum when we were on a holiday. This was when I was 14. I used them to politely ask whoever or whatever was there to please leave the house, peacefully. Somehow this ended up working, and I was perfectly okay in that room again. I slept fine. All of my phones, including upgraded ones afterwards, were fine as well. I moved out of the house when I was 20. And when I went back to visit my parents, I'd stay the night in my old room. Whatever was there when I was a child is back. The same corner, the same feeling, the same dark energy, the same creature, except now I have an image that's burned into my memory despite never actually seeing it. It's a dark creature. It has a human-type shape, but very muscular. It crawls around on all fours, legs bent behind it, almost wolf-like, but without a snout. It snarls and glares. Dark red eyes with big black pupils. It has horns as well, big horns that curve back over its head. There's some type of red tinge to it, but I can't identify where it comes from. So there you go. That's my story. Believe me or not, it doesn't matter to me. But I do not go into that room anymore when I see my parents. Not even in the daytime. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I want to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest. After looking into the matter a little more, I have a lot more details I think will paint a clear picture, so just bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud, between crickets and the tree frogs and the cicadas. It can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog would not go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me. I am her whole world. But on this night, as I held the door open, she looked out, then looked at me and was like, "Nope." So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was there was not a peep outside. It was dead silent. I still shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed down to my car. When I'd gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt as if something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached for my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked out all around me. Then all of a sudden, I heard one of the hedges rattle that lined our walkway. At first I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked or something, as I'd just seen one earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub nearby. I drew my gun and called out, "Whoever that was, you're about to be shot." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think, and maybe this was some local teenagers just messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back towards my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog. But what made me really note back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up right onto my front porch, drew my gun once again, expecting it to be right behind me, but there was nothing. A couple weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on our bench with my wife. She got up and walked around to get something inside, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that same panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet it sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped back into the house. Now at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I let it go. A month or so later, it was really rainy and stormy. This was around 9 p.m. My wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. I grew up in Oregon, so I really love the rain, and for the past 10 years we've lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in one day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. My wife grew up in Nevada, so rain was again a rare thing, so she loved going outside and just watching it. So for both of us, it was an enjoyable experience. Except this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No, what did you hear?" She said, "I swear, it sounded like a small child calling out for help in the woods." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, I don't hear anything, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me offended and said, "No, I am positive. How could you not hear that? It sounds like our son. I think he's out there and got lost." "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch." We both got up and looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children lying there. "It's so weird. I swore it sounded like our son." "It isn't him. He's right there. Besides, again, I don't hear anything." She stood up and said, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught walking into them during the daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I have been listening the whole time. There's absolutely nobody out there calling for help. You need to stay here." Getting worried about her, she was acting completely out of character. Not to mention at this time, she is 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "Well, what if there's some child out there lost in the woods?" First off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's completely lit up like a Christmas tree is nil. She then says, "I know, but what if it's a kid?" Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking towards the stairs. Jumped up and grabbed her hand again, saying, "No, get in the house." I don't know what's going on with you, but you need to go inside. She finally complies, and we both go inside. I don't know what that was, but I was completely freaked out. A few months pass after that event. It was getting dark outside, and I heard the front door to our house open up, so I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so they can't open it without us there. So to hear the sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she normally doesn't go outside without saying something to me. So I walked up front, saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. Told her, seriously? You just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate that? She then looks out into the woods and says, see, there it is again. Again, I can't hear anything, but what I did notice is that silence was back. I told her just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside of our house is slim to none, and she needed to get back in the house. At this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she thankfully did. Now looking back, I really feel bad, knowing what I know now. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were out on the front porch again. It's early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn. Our 3-year-old son was riding around in his little car in front of the house. Now he knows he's not allowed to be outside of a certain area that we mapped off, but he loves playing outside. The road being 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be as careful as we possibly can. As we're talking, we're both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction only took approximately maybe 8 seconds, as all they said was, how are things? We said good. He told us he would stop by later if his wife got something for the kids. We said, okay, great, and he drove off. I looked over where our son had just was, and he was gone. I called out to him, called out his name, and I could hear his car on our side drive. I then scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I said, you got 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house, or else. He adamantly pointed in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods, just assumed he saw a deer or a squirrel or something, and maybe he wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front, and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I just wouldn't let him walk off into the woods. I just wrote this off as him being a curious little 3-year-old. Now this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done something similar, but nothing quite as extreme. There have been nights where I just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang outside on the house, on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now the weird part about this is our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level. That's a full-size basement that's center block. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked out to investigate. Dead silence again. The floodlight that's on the side of our house had clicked off at this point. So I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. Nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the back side of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Feeling of someone watching me was back. I shined the light up in the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that 3 of my dogs in the area weren't making a peep. Now, our dogs have no filter. Will bark at anyone and everyone. This includes me. So to see all of them hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really worried me. I kept walking, and all of a sudden, the crickets and frogs and everything else started making sounds again, as if someone just flipped a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I didn't see anything. She shrugged and just said, as long as our dogs are okay. Due to those circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 of our exterior walls. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time, I find nothing going on outside. There's also been times where my wife and I will just be sitting and watching a movie or something. The wife walked over and said, "Did you call me?" I would respond and tell her no. And she kept claiming and swearing she heard me call her name in her ear, saying that it was definitely my voice, but didn't understand because it sounded so close, and I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part to this was she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now, our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground. It's like a balcony. It has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it for barbecuing. There have been several instances where she said she heard someone whisper in her ear, but couldn't make out the sound. Again, I just chalked it up to thinking she's going crazy. But you'll see, I think all of this tied into the final moment, where things are all revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop, on the opposite side of our property, next to the main road. It's kind of on a downslope, but works perfectly for what I need it for. The range itself is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the downrange, you have the woods surrounding you on all sides except for back up to my shop. I have to say it always felt creepy when I'm dealing with my targets or mowing. When you're down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day, around 5 in the evening, I was sighting a new rifle scope, and the sun was still up but was starting to fade, so I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened while I was making multiple trips downrange other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you've been in Tennessee woods, you will know that there's a lot of branches that fall off trees randomly out of nowhere. So this is nothing new. Except this time, it was very loud and sounded like fresh, strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked but didn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I quickly turned, but again, nothing. As I started to walk back again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is it was all around me. I turned around to face the range and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes had freaked me out. So running was not a good idea. I slowly walked backwards up the hill to my rifle, and nothing happened. I quickly grabbed it, sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag, grabbed my rifle bag, and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this because I didn't want to freak her out. Fast forward about a year later from when we'd moved in, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over her summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store about a mile from our house, and I saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the other side of the road just ahead of us. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but a different color and size. Just as I said out loud, "What is that?" they squinted and vanished. I made the comment that it was almost if they knew I could see them and moved. The color itself was kind of a golden green, but they resembled the mannerism of a large cat as they felt very ominous. It's tough to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing more. A few moments later, we arrived back at our house. As we were getting the bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house, excited to see me. As I was waiting to help carry in the bags, I heard my dog start growling. I looked in the direction she was looking at my neighbor's property across the street. Now, what I saw has kept me up all night. Up until this point, I've always been skeptical, as I had never actually seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Even with what had happened to me the year prior, I still had doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. My street is kind of spread out, like a neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of the road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large, dark figure between the trees. The movement itself caught me off guard, as it looked like it was something big, moving quickly on all 4s. Then when it came out into clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of his shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking, but moving faster than any normal person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was almost like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. What the hell is that? I realized that it was looking now directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open, and moving as quickly as it could, all while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whatever it was definitely stalking us. I told my niece, "Get in the house now." I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my AR with the short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of the car, knowing I had just told her firmly to get into the house. Her blatant disregard to my command annoyed me, but I still watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. Later on, I asked her what she saw, and her face was pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods, walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her to, and she said she thought I was just talking to my son. I then told her what I had saw, and now she wanted to get a closer look at it, to see if she could actually see something. I told her it was not a good idea, and stupidly, she went anyway. She was walking down the walkway. I heard the sound of dry leaves and crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and at least take a flashlight. Now, at this point, she's maybe 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. She turned and started walking back to me, and I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is raised up, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall. Whatever this was, cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings, grabbed the flashlight and walked back toward the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks, leaned forward as if she could see something, and I asked her, "What do you see?" She quickly turned and ran back up the porch with a terrified look, saying, "Nope, nope, nope," over and over again. She said it was like a figure hiding inside of a tree, and said she saw some eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was they looked dull red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I asked her what she meant by dead. She told me that the pupils looked like they were gray, like the way eyes look when they go blind. She said it was really dark gray, and swears she could see through it, almost like a cloud. I told her to get inside and went and locked the door. The next morning we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it put its height around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. I have no idea what this thing was. After doing a little bit of research, I think this thing was a glimmerman or a crawler. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. Now, I originally posted this in r/Bigfoot, but after doing a bunch of research, I believe this thing belongs here. One of the things that makes this fit is that it can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Secondly, it has a playback-like communication. So when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs it had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, as he had recently fell and cried for help then. The baby crying would be our newborn baby, who she'd given birth to just recently. And this thing must have heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice to her. Another thing that my niece had said that night was she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said it felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and kept wanting her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over this past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there is a property that is barbed wired off, and has a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down the road is underdeveloped owned land, and one of the trees there has a large old sign that says, "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now I have to admit, when I first saw this sign I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property, and then teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything. It's just pure forest as far as the eye can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make a loud scream when threatened. Now that you understand my story, I doubt that this is the ending. The next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to disappear one day. And if there's more than one of these things out there, this really does make the missing 411 stuff make a whole lot more sense. I'm completely perplexed and scared of what I can do. Any advice would be appreciated. I'll try and keep this post alive with any new experiences. My wife and I recently purchased our first home after the birth of our daughter. Everything was as you would expect for the first few months. Painting, decorating, renovating, basking in our newfound slice of the American dream. You get the idea. However, unusual things started happening several months ago. One day, I was getting home after work and passed by a strange truck or two, 3 houses down from ours. I say strange for a few reasons. We literally know everyone in our small neighborhood, and I'd never seen this truck or person before. There's no reason for through traffic to come down our street, and the truck was driving very slowly, like, put it in drive but don't press on the gas slowly. As I pulled in our driveway, the truck flipped a U-turn and came back toward my house. Getting out of my car, the truck crawled by and the driver stared daggers at me as he passed, then sped off. I don't like to judge based on appearances. I like to think that I don't scare easily. Something about this guy's eyes just gave me a bad feeling. Obviously, this is weird, as I mentioned what happened to my wife, telling her we should be more mindful about security. When I told her the type of truck, my wife said, "That same truck drove by and the guy stared at me when I got home this afternoon. I thought he was just being creepy and checking me out." I tried to tease her a bit to lighten the mood, calling her cocky for assuming any guy driving by was checking her out. I didn't want to freak her out, but I was definitely freaked out. We saw the truck a few more times over the next couple of weeks, either driving by slowly or parked down the block facing our yard. But one day, the truck stopped driving by and we haven't seen it since. So I just sort of dismissed the whole thing as me being paranoid. Then other things started happening. In the past month or so, my wife had been hearing tapping on the windows at the front of our house at night. It happened 2 or 3 times to each of us separately, always around 10 or 11 p.m., always a soft but distinct. It sounds like knocking with a single knuckle on a metal part of a screen door, if that makes any sense. The first time my wife and hear the tapping together was last weekend. We were in our front room playing with our daughter around 9:30 p.m., just about to settle her down for bed. Our front room has a large, almost floor-to-ceiling window running the length of the wall next to the front door, which faces the street. We were all sitting on the floor with our backs to the window reading our daughter a book when we heard it. Now, our house is older. Creaks and cracks are not uncommon, but this sound was distinctly intentional. So intentional that my wife and I immediately looked at each other and bolted up and out of the room. I had my wife and daughter lock themselves in a back room while I turned on all the lights and did a sweep around the outside of the house. Of course, I didn't see anything, and was ready to dismiss the whole thing as more paranoia over something that probably had an innocent explanation. That was until last night. Around 9:45, we hear our daughter making noise in the baby monitor. I waited a few minutes to see if she would settle down, but when it became clear she wouldn't, I got up to go put her back to sleep. The layout of the room is important to visualize for the next part. The room is on the side of our house, but the exterior walls juts out a bit, kind of in an L shape, and the corner of this L is made up of windows. If you're standing in the door to the room, you're directly across from these windows in one corner, and then there's a rocking chair in the other corner pointed towards the front of the house. The window faces the street, and the other faces our neighbor's house. A garden bed planted with small shrubs wraps around the outside of the house directly underneath this. I was sitting in the chair getting my daughter settled down. I had a lamp on in the room, so it was softly lit. Once she fell asleep, I stood up to put her in her crib when something caught my eye. There was a figure about a foot away from the window. In the bare space between the shrubs and the house, they were just staring at us. I didn't look long enough to see anything more than what appeared to be a man in a light gray hoodie, standing a few feet on the other side of the glass. Sprinting from the room, I brought my daughter back to my wife and I's bedroom, leaving her there while telling my understandably confused wife to lock the door. After turning off all the lights inside the house and turning on all the lights outside, I began moving from room to room, peering out the windows and into the darkness. Couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Whoever it was must have taken off after seeing me notice them and made a quick exit. Obviously, I had some trouble sleeping after this. I spent hours checking the security cameras and going from room to room, looking out the windows into the night, hoping, but also not hoping, that I could see anything that could explain what happened. This morning I went outside to the spot where that figure would have been standing. I thought and hoped maybe there was a plant or something that I mistook for a person. When I got to the spot, I realized the figure had to be standing exactly in a bare patch of ground about 2 feet in diameter, directly in front of that window. Part of me is still hoping that I'm being paranoid. The mind can play tricks on you in the dark, seeing things that aren't really there, especially when you're a sleep-deprived new parent. But with everything that's been happening, I can't shake the feeling that there was actually someone out there last night, watching us. Please, let me be wrong. Hey everyone, thanks for listening if you stuck around at this point. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell to be notified when future episodes come out. If you have a true scary story of your own, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my subreddit. You can stalk me on Twitter, you can stalk me on Facebook, and you can also stalk me on Instagram. You can also find all these stories in long compilation form wherever you find your podcasts. Also, please be sure to check out my short channel and my new true crime channel that's coming very soon. I would appreciate follows, likes, subs, all that fun jazz. You already know. You already know what I'm gonna say. You already know that I'm gonna be like, please give me some subbies. But that's all I'm gonna say for that one. Again, I appreciate you listening. I hope you like this episode. I have another episode that's going to be coming out in the next couple of days. It'll be the first responder, true stories or scary stories, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be like that format you saw with the funeral stories. So those are going to be shorter. So those episodes will be 3 to 5, sometimes more stories that'll be short, scary, and to the point. And those episodes, I'll have 1 to 2 of those a week. And then the true scary stories like you're listening to right now is going to be longer, have the rain background. I feel like that's what a lot of you are here for, is for this. But I also want to scratch a couple itches and do that kind of shorter visual scary stories as well and get that fixed as well. So if you like those, cool. If you don't got to watch them, obviously. And if you're here for the true scary stories told in the rain, well, I'm still going to do those at least once a week. So I think that is really all I got to say today. Also, huge shout out to Interscare for helping me on the episode. Just met this dude and his wife earlier this week, and really rad, really cool people, and can't think of any reason why to not have them on. Talented, awesome. I started doing their thumbnail work, and here we are. So I think I'm going to be featured on their channels here pretty soon, and she's going to be on probably the next one next week. So you didn't hear her today, but you'll hear her next week. So look out for that. I think that's it. Cheers. Also, if you didn't know, if you're a big energy drinker, Chuck Norris actually had the idea to pee in a can, and that's now called Red Bull.